welcome back to the Collin Cadmus Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Chris Orlob. Chris studied marketing at Utah Valley University and then went on to start his career at InsideSales.com, after which he started his own company, Conversature, which eventually merged with Gong, at which point Chris became the director of product marketing and eventually the head of sales, where he helped grow the company from $200K ARR to over $7 billion valuation in 5 years. In 2022, Chris left Gong to start his current venture, where he serves as the founder and CEO of Pclub.io, a sales training platform that aggregates courses from top practitioners into one platform. The last time I spoke with Chris was back in 2019, and it feels like just about everything has changed since then with the advent of remote work, sales AI, and the divergence from the growth at all cost model. So I'm excited to dive in and get your thoughts on all that's changing. Chris, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining me.
That might be the most generously worded introduction that has ever happened with me on one of these podcasts. Studied marketing at UVU is one way to put it. Merged with Gong is one way to put it. Let's go with those ideas. I like that.
Did you not graduate? And was it not exactly a merger?
Did I intensively study marketing, or did I sit in a lecture class passively having a professor talk at me, waiting to go party at the end of the day?
Well, that's about my college experience too. I don't know that it's been much different, but no, I actually really enjoy writing those intros. You know, I usually just go on people's LinkedIn, I'll go on their website, and then I just kind of piece together what I know about them. But yeah, it sort of just flows. I was laughing at myself last night because I'm like, where are you coming up with these words? The advent, the divergence. I'm like, I don't say that, but somehow when I write these intros, like these words just come to me. I must hear it somewhere along the way. But anyway, let's dive in. I've got a handful of questions here. I've got a total of 7 questions, but we'll probably have some subtopics within each of them. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Outbound prospecting has become increasingly challenging. Conversion rates for calls, for emails continue to decline. To set the stage here, I want to get your thoughts. What do you think outbound salespeople should be doing differently today?
Well, I think a lot about this one because we are at an inflection point with Pclub's growth where we're starting to consider, should we be hiring SDRs, or how do we continue building demand and pipeline?
So you actually have to make that decision for yourself.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm thinking a lot about it. And there's so much arguing on the internet about whether SDRs are going to exist or not, or whether that's the right model going forward, that it has put me in a stance of questioning that model. And I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do with that, but there's a few things I want to hit on. One of which you said probably 2 weeks ago, just coincidentally, you said, how did you put it? You said, scale demand ahead of sales headcount.
Yes.
And I think that's probably the most foundational philosophy you can have when it comes to any sort of scaling up demand. You said it in a way that I had never heard before, and it clicked with me. And so we focus on that pretty seriously here at Pclub, where we just hired our 3rd account executive. He's starting in a couple weeks, and we didn't hire our 4th or 5th or 6th account executive for that exact reason. Yeah. We felt that based on the demand we're seeing in the market and the pull we are seeing toward Pclub, we can probably support 3, and we've got a little more work to do from the B2B marketing standpoint. Now, tactically, what does good outbound look like today for people that are listening and want to take something away that's more actionable than the philosophy I just talked about? I think the key, this is hard to do, easy to say, hard to do, is can you agitate the pain and capture the pain in a cold email or a cold call better than the buyer can articulate it themselves? And there's a few things worth highlighting in that sentence, one of which is the best cold outreach is suspiciously devoid of talking about the product. It doesn't talk about the product's features. It doesn't talk about the benefits of the product. It doesn't talk about how the product works, at least for the most part. It is a page from your buyer's diary about the pain it's agitating. Yeah. So the second part of that is, are you capturing it in a way that they once could not articulate, right? You did that with me. I just gave an example, right? Scale demand ahead of sales headcount. If you can go to market with insights like that, that kind of change how the buyer is thinking or feeling about their problem, I think you'll be pretty successful.
Love it. And, that reminds me of, I'm dealing with some companies that I do some sponsored posts for. on LinkedIn, right? They want to sort of get the word out there for their product and they're looking for an endorsement. And if I like the product and I think it's relevant to my audience, sure, right? I'll do that. But it's the same feedback that you just gave that I actually give to them after having tried this a bunch of times to see what works and what doesn't. When we write a post where we just talk about the product and it's very clearly an advertisement and we're listing off some features and some CTA, it doesn't perform well in the same way that a cold email generally doesn't when you do that. But when I write a post where it's just about the problem, it's just a topic, and the post is something that I probably would have written anyway, right? And then you just add something at the bottom, like if you're trying to solve this problem, like, and I actually think I stole some of that from you, as I see the way that you're effectively marketing Pclub. And I used to like not put links in my LinkedIn posts. It was always put it in the comments, all this stuff. And I don't know if the algorithms changed. It seems like it may not be punishing that the way it used to, but it was you that I sort of saw. I'm like, oh, well, he's being successful with that. And he's sort of hiding it at the end. And it's not like a big sales pitch. It's like a real post that you would normally write, but it's relevant and it's connected to whatever's being promoted at the bottom. And so you can sort of tie it in. And those posts seem to do pretty well. So it's the same thing that you're describing with the emails, I think.
It reminds me of another thing that's been on my mind lately, that every sales professional listening is going to smile and nod and agree with what I'm about to say. And very few of them actually act on this, which is the most fundamental job of selling, of marketing, of creating demand, anything like that, is emotional response. And it's to write for emotional response. It's to speak for emotional response. It's to question for emotional response. But if you really break down and analyze how most salespeople and marketers are going to market, they'll smile and nod and agree with what I just said. And then their entire pitch, question sequence, copy is geared for analytical and logical response. They are trying to subtly argue with the buyer to buy and logic the buyer into buy. And there is a time and place for ROI and justifying with logic and all that kind of stuff. I think a lot of salespeople are either gun shy about tactfully going for the jugular, if I can say that on this podcast, when it comes to emotional response, or they just do it. They fundamentally don't understand what I mean when I say some of these words.
Yeah, what rings in my ear when you say that is I tend to see, at least throughout my career, when that happens most is when they truly don't understand the customer and the problem. And they've spent most of their training learning the product and the features and the value statements. And then they also spend the rest of their training, learning, here's all the fields I need to fill out in Salesforce for my discovery, right? And so that becomes their sales process, just this checklist of things that they need to do, information that they're supposed to gather, rather than having that emotional connection, which you said, right? I always tell salespeople when they're prospecting, I've always taught them this, you have to flip your mindset, right? And I think a lot of this can actually start, we talked about it on the episode 13 with Kevin Dorsey. I think we touched on this, where we talked about the incentive, right? And if you're incentivizing people to book meetings, their brain is always focused on just getting someone to say yes to the meeting. That's where their brain is going to be. But if you say, hey, what you should be doing is focusing on just connecting and having conversations with as many people that are actually a good fit for our product, and they agree with us on the problem. And that's the big switch is I don't want to get on the phone and try to cold call someone and get them to agree to a meeting. I want to get on the phone with someone and cold call them and have them agree that they have the problem that we can solve. And if we can align on that problem, they'll probably ask for the meeting, right? Like the meeting will basically book itself. That's the mindset that I've always tried to teach the salespeople. Is just get away from I need to book 10 meetings. I need to find 10 people who actually agree they have this problem. It's a switch inside your head that changes at a certain point with that.
What you're also alluding to is something I like to say, which is a little bit blasphemous for me of all people to say, and I'll explain why, which is who you are talking to, who is more important than what and how in sales. And I say that's blasphemous because I'm the guy who sells the how. I am the guy who sells the sales techniques and skills and tactics.
Right.
But there's this guy named Gary Halbert, which few people listening are going to know about. He's no longer alive. He was probably one of the best direct response marketers of all time. Multi-millionaire as a result of like direct mail campaigns that he wrote the copy for in the 80s. And toward the end of his life, he would do this seminar, like copywriting seminar with, a bunch of aspiring marketers and probably salespeople too. And he would say, we're going to do an exercise. We're going to start competing burger stands. And the exercise is you can choose whatever competitive advantage for your burger stand that you want. You get to choose first. But then once you've chosen, I get to choose mine. And 99% chance my competitive advantage is going to dwarf yours. And so go ahead and choose. And the audience would say things like amazing tasting burger or systematized operations like McDonald's or something like great branding, something like that. And he would say, okay, is that your final answer? And they would say, yes. And he would say, my competitive advantage is I don't care what the burger tastes like. I don't care about any of the stuff you mentioned. I'm going to plop my burger stand in the middle of a crowd of very hungry people. And I'm going to crush you because the hunger of the market and the propensity of them to want to fill their problem and satisfy their demand matters more than anything. And you just explained how that shows up in cold outreach, cold call. I'm not going to cajole you into meeting with me because even if you agree and you're low propensity, we're going to have a bad time, as they would say on South Park.
Yeah.
But if you can filter through high propensity people by, do they agree to the problem? That sales process is probably going to go a lot more smoothly.
Yeah. Bingo. Location, location, location when it comes to anything where you're interacting on site. I can't remember where I heard this. I don't even know if I did. Maybe I just thought of it. But, you talk about Burning Man. It's like location is everything. If you're selling water at Burning Man in the desert, you're making a bunch of money. But if you're selling water in the desert when Burning Man isn't there, you're going broke. Right. Mm-hmm. And so location timing, like it was always, I thought, a clever example to that. Okay, this is actually a hot topic that is in the news now because Amazon's making waves that they're pushing everyone back into the office and, they're done with the remote work. So I want to get your thoughts on what do you think is the best way to build a sales team in 2024? Is it remote? Is it hybrid? Is it in the office? Or if you want to sort of go in a different direction and just list the pros and cons there, or, how you would maybe make that decision.
I'll talk about how I think about it, but I don't have the full scope or lens of how everybody else is thinking about this, because I think it actually depends on the context of your business, the stage of your business, that kind of stuff. My opinion is if you are starting a sales team or you're in the early stages of a sales team, similar to my sales team, you are better off having that team in person, in an office, some number of days per week, because you've led sales teams before that are part of startups. You can iterate so much faster. Yes, things like Gong exist, all that kind of stuff. But hearing all of the conversations and just learning by osmosis, by sitting next to each other, can be really powerful. Now, that's going to sound hypocritical because my entire sales team is remote. But so they're, don't look at me too close based on what I'm recommending.
Well, you're also remote, right? So it's not like you're in an office, like you're following that pattern. Yeah. And you're also not looking to scale a massive company. I mean,
no, I am.
In terms of headcount. Oh, are you?
Yeah. I mean, it's going to take,
okay.
But yeah. Okay. We've got some aspirations. But
what's different than SaaS? Like you're not going to hire 100 people this year and like do crazy.
No, it's not going to be. Yeah, nothing like that. But the counteract to this and why I'm, not all in person is access to talent. You have a much greater pool of talent, right? I hired a guy in the Bay Area, a guy in San Antonio, a guy closer to me out in the Los Angeles area. And I live in Newport Beach, right? If I'm trying to start like a sales team, a tech sales team in Newport Beach, it's slim pickings, right? There's some, a lot of people moved here and became remote as a result of COVID and all that kind of stuff. But it's not like being in one of these, more major tech hubs like New York City or San Francisco, or even the smaller ones like Salt Lake and Denver and Atlanta and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So if I had my druthers, everybody would be in the office, probably not every day, probably 2 to 3 days a week. I think that's probably all you need. But the principle of expanding our pool of talent and access to talent won out there. I still do think we're probably going to have some physical offices at some point. I will probably make them optional, maybe except for SDRs. That's actually one of my opinions that I think.
Or new hires when they're learning.
Yeah. Right? I mean, like if you're just getting out of college or you're really early in your career and you're an SDR role or something like that, and you're working from home, hey, maybe this is the boomer in me. I just don't have trust that that person has great work from home habits yet.
And I don't think they'll enjoy the job. That's the one thing that for me I'm very on the fence with it. Like I like being remote, but I also hate it. I'm so 50-50 with it. Right. I
Yeah.
miss the office. Like the energy of coming into the office and being with a great team every day is just something that you cannot get from working at home. And that does change the entire culture of the company over time, right? I think what we're living through today still is a lot of companies did all the hard work to build these great teams in the office. And now they're able to successfully go remote because they've already built that chemistry, the training, the skill levels. To try to build that from scratch remote is very hard. I haven't done it. I've helped through consulting and I've been involved in it, but I haven't literally built a team from scratch remote. I'm sure I could. I don't think it would be nearly as easy, and I don't think the results would be as good. You'd probably opt for hiring people with more experience, right, rather than training them. And then the downside to that is, well, now you've got a bunch of people coming in with habits that you probably don't want them to have, that if you went entry level, like you could have actually molded them better. And so, yeah, I think there's probably an element of we're just probably a little bit stuck in our ways. And there will probably be people who come after us who've never been in an office. And I think those will be the people who actually crack the code to remote. I think they'll be the ones to actually figure out the best way to do it, because it's just not the way we're thinking. We're thinking about how do we take what we used to do and sort of make it remote. And I don't think we can change that in our brains. So I'm excited to sort of see what the next generations come up with, because it just might be totally different for them. And the things that we see as problems, like not being able to go out for some happy hour drinks at, 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock with coworkers, they've never done that. And so they're not going to miss it, and that may actually be an upside for them because they're not coming into work hungover the next day. So, there'll be sort of these interesting, differences over time. But let's jump into the next one. I want to talk about quota attainment. It's atrocious. And I don't even think that the numbers that we know about are even accurate anymore. They say it's under 40%. I think it's probably much worse if we were to actually get a true average. But let's just touch on that for a minute here. We don't have to go too far into it if you don't want to. But do you have general advice for what should be fixed there? Do the quotas just need to be lower? Is it just the bad training? Is it the quotas are based on the wrong metric? What are your thoughts there? What needs to change? Obviously, 40% is not sustainable, and people are being robbed, and it just shouldn't be that way, unless you disagree.
Yeah. Well, I have some thoughts on here that I'm sure at least some pocket of the internet is going to put me up on a stake and stab the digital spear into me.
It'll be Reddit. That will be the pocket.
100%. So I'll start with like what I think caused the problem, and then I'll get into quota and whether that should be lowered or raised or whatever. I think there's probably 2 or 3 things that are causing low quota attainment. One is just a lot of demand, straightforwardly, is being sucked out of the market.
Yeah.
Depending on the category you're in. There's not much more to say, right? We were in a demand positive environment in 2021. We shifted to a demand neutral and in many cases a demand negative environment. Now,
in other words, basically everyone has multiple competitors today.
Multiple competitors, products that were once a must-have, problems that were once a must-have are now a nice-to-have.
Lots of overlapping products, right?
Yeah.
So you once needed these 3, but now one kind of does all of the stuff. And
exactly. Now, and that risk aversion has been introduced to buying committees. So buying committees are bigger, they're more risk averse, decisions are made at a higher level and more scrutiny. So that part actually can be contended with. Now, I'm not saying skills are the answer to anything, but what I have found through talking to many sales leaders over the last couple of years is the skills reps had in 2021 have not been updated, modernized, reinvented, transformed to sell in a demand negative or demand neutral environment, because it's a different skill set. Now, the skill set by itself cannot solve for all demand being sucked out of a space, right? So there's a limit to this, but not all demand has been sucked out of a space. It's more demand is there. Risk aversion has been blanketed over much of the market. And many sellers have not upskilled themselves or have been upskilled by their organization. So those are kind of my precursors to quota attainment. The question of should we lower quotas? What should we do about quotas? I think I can't really give a blanket answer, but I will anyway, because I think the real answer is it depends on a company by company basis.
Right.
But if you look at the economics of setting quota against OTE, you can only go so low with a quota to make your business economically sustainable, right? Most like venture capitalists and what have you are going to say healthy economics are when your annual quota is 4 to 5x the OTE. So if you've got a $200,000 OTE with a rep, ideally they have somewhere between $800,000 and $1 million a year they're on the hook for. Now, can you lower that a little bit to make it to reduce burnout and increase morale? Yes, but there's a limit, right? At some point, the economics of your business stop working.
Yeah.
And I don't think most salespeople, let alone sales leaders, understand that. They think in terms of one line of the P&L, which is revenue.
Yes.
They don't think about everything else that goes into it, and let alone things that aren't even on a P&L like cash flow. So that's kind of how I think about that. The last thing I will say is, like, in sales, you win together and lose together, right? So if you're in a shitty economy and your logic is my quota should be cut in half, will you also say in a very good booming economy, my quota should be doubled or increased by 50%? If you are not willing to play that game, you can't play, it's I want my cake and I want to eat it too. So that's how I think about that topic.
Yeah. So that's quite aligned with my thoughts. I think, Kevin and I went into some thoughts on this, and we kind of spoke from a personal experience where we have actually lowered quotas and saw average revenue go up. And so we spoke a bunch in episode 13 about really the mental factor there. But there's multiple layers to it. I mean, to your point, you can only lower quota so much, right? It still has to be profitable. I think it actually ties into the first topic we talked about, which is about, not hiring people until you have the demand, right? And so that's a big part of the problem. Maybe the quotas are actually fine. We're just hiring too many salespeople. There's not enough demand. In many scenarios, I would argue that's probably the case, but not in all. To your point, and you were good. I think Kevin and I did give blanketed answers, but your point is accurate, which is that there is really not one answer to this. But if I had to guess, the bulk of the problem industry wide is probably it tied into the demand piece, the competitive piece, but also just hiring too many salespeople in general, which is sort of the same problem of demand. It's just so many people, right? Everyone's inboxes are blowing up, 10x that what they did 10 years ago. And so we're only going to respond to so many emails, if that, right? So there's just only so many sales to be made, even if we're solving different problems. I mean, that's probably part of it too, is in SaaS, we've got a SaaS tool for every little problem.
Yes.
And to your point, the risk aversion has gone up, right? People are being much more skeptical about signing up for tools because they've become more experienced buyers. They've been burned many times. And I think they've also realized the fact that even if a tool is excellent at solving a problem, if you're just bringing on too many tools, your team's not going to probably use them all. And there's that, whole element of it too.
Well, I think what salespeople also often fail to understand is just because it solves pain or a problem does not mean you should solve that pain or problem.
Yeah.
Right. Because most executives, this is a blanket statement, caveat, blah, blah, blah. Most executives in their business don't live in cash poverty. They live in time and attention poverty. So if you're pitching a product and they admit to a problem and you still can't understand why they buy or why they don't buy, well, put yourself in the executive's shoes. They get off the Zoom call. Their Slack is lit up like a Christmas tree. Their phone is blown up with calls. Their inbox is a train wreck. They can only prioritize solving so many problems. And if it doesn't make its way to their priority slide, it doesn't matter how crisp your problem definition is, because if it's a nice to solve, they're going to forget about it. Or if they're an experienced buyer, they're just not going to consider it because they know they're not going to get to it.
Bingo. It goes back to what I said earlier, right? You got to align on the problem. And if you can't align on that, it really doesn't matter how amazing your solution even is, right? Mm-hmm. Good stuff. Okay, let's talk about really the same thing, but in regards to the VP sales average tenure. I mean, it's a different problem, but sort of a similar topic, which is there's just this trend in the industry. This average is really bad. We say this is the most important role in the company. At least many would say that. Why is it so low? 18 months. And again, I argue that's probably not accurate. It's probably lower because if I get fired in 3 months, I'm not putting that on my LinkedIn, right? It's probably coming off. It's probably coming out of the data completely. And that happens. There's a lot of people in the first 90 days, they're just getting canned because it just didn't work out. And they're pulling that off their LinkedIn. So I would argue the 18 months is probably even on the high end because it's not including the true failures or the really extreme failures that do happen. And even sometimes it's just the company hired you, they didn't hit some revenue target, in the first 90 days, or they didn't close their round of funding and they can't afford you. And people just get fired half the time for not even it being their fault. But do you have thoughts on this throughout the years that you've been in the space? Have you seen, sort of anything that says, hey, this is why this is happening? I mean, I'll give you my personal thought first, which I've talked about ad nauseum on this podcast, which is I think it just has a lot to do with what I call the VC narrative game, which is that we sort of always have this pressure to come up with a new narrative for the next board meeting. And, often that narrative is great when you're bringing new characters into the story. And, you pitch these new executives you're going to hire. And if the story just isn't super amazing, like, hey, we just hit 200% of quota, well, then it's probably not exciting enough. And maybe we need a new character, or we need someone to blame for, whatever had happened. So I sort of think that has a lot to do with it. Obviously, the other problems we talked about also tie into it, but what are your thoughts there? And is there something that should change to fix that?
I think there's a handful of things I would say. One is, I think there's, especially in tech, there's a lot of CEOs who don't exactly have a deep domain expertise on sales and running a sales team. And they expect a VP of sales who is by definition not a generalist, like they are. That's what a CEO is a generalist. And they expect other problems that are outside of the sales domain to go away. Product market fit issues, demand generation issues, that kind of thing. So I think there's too much expectation and too little support. And I'm not saying don't expect a lot. You should expect a ton from your VP of sales in the specialized area that they're a specialist in. So that's one. The other one has to do with a different definition of product market fit, which is product market fit for the person in the role, where the person, the VP of sales, is the product and the fit or the role is the market. A lot of times these two things are misaligned, right? So I'll give you an example. Today at Pclub, if I was hiring a sales leader, I think most inexperienced tech CEOs would go hire a VP of sales if they were in my business, running my business right now. I think that's the wrong move. I have a pretty repeatable sales process, at least for the maturity of business we're in. And if I was to hire a sales leader, I would want to hire a somewhat experienced frontline manager to simply operate the system.
Right.
If I hired a VP of sales, it would be, and they're like a true VP of sales, it'd be overkill. There's not much strategic work I need yet. I will need that in 18 months. But I think that's a big piece is like, we are not clear on what problem we're solving with this VP of sales or head of sales hire. We are not clear on what they should do and not do. And we just go hire somebody generally with some track record of sales leadership experience. And it turns out what we needed and what they have is a mismatch. The last thing I'll say is I think there's like philosophical differences that often end in exiting a VP of sales. That actually happened with me in Pclub. I hired a person to be my head of sales. She was an amazing seller. I only have positive things to say about her. We had very different philosophies of how to run a sales team as soon as we brought in some account executives. And so we had to unfortunately part ways. In other contexts, she would be an amazingly successful head of sales. We just couldn't get on the same page as far as like philosophies go. So that's another thing you have to ask, a CEO, if you're like an aspiring VP of sales, is how do you think this sales team should be run and grown? And can you get on that? Because if you can't, most CEOs aren't going to change their mind on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's so well said. I always say it needs to happen in phases. And I'm dealing with one of my consulting clients right now is, they're going to go through the phase of getting away from founder-led sales. And what is almost always the case is that they're very excited to get away from that. They're very excited for that to not be their responsibility anymore. And so they want to sort of do it in all like one clean sweep. They want to make a hire and just like get out. And that never, ever, ever, or I shouldn't say never. It rarely works because what they fail to realize is a few things. Number one is that the process that they've proven as a founder, in most cases, it cannot just be repeated by someone else, right? And so you have to first figure out, how do I hire some AEs? I call them founding AEs. And how do I, as the founder, try to teach them to sell? Because they're not going to be able to do what I can do. A founder can say, oh, you need this feature, we don't have it yet. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll have it done for you in 90 days, right? If we can get this deal done today. Like regular salespeople can't do things like that, right? And founders do that all the time with founder-led sales. And part of that is good. They're evolving the product, and that's the reason that they should be doing that. But what they don't realize is when you go into this next phase, you now need a repeatable process that isn't repeated by you. It needs to be repeated by other people. And so I always say, bring in some founding AEs, maybe 2 to 5 of them at first, and manage them and lead them and get them to a place where their process is working with very little of your involvement. Then you want to have someone take over managing them. And usually you want to try to pick one of them to do it. Ideally, you hired someone who sort of had those chops, right? And they can sort of take that over. And if you do it in these right phases, it tends to go a lot better because you're recrafting the process as you're doing it. Whereas what they want to do is just hire someone today and be like, hey, I'm done with sales tomorrow. It just doesn't work, especially when you're dealing with complex products or services where the founder's so ingrained in every process. So I'm with you there. And that ties into the next question, which is growth at all costs. So this is a big topic I've been chatting about a lot with folks. It seems like the industry is sort of making this split here where some companies are sticking with growth at all costs. They're going to keep raising capital. They're going to keep spending it like crazy. And I think there's instances where that makes sense. I've been using Rippling as an example. You know, they obviously experienced founders. Obviously, they know the space very well. And it's clearly the type of space where you want to get market share really fast.
Yes.
And there's tons of money to be made in that space because they're dealing with healthcare and whatnot. So for those reasons, I say like Rippling's great example of growth at all costs. They should do it. They should keep doing it for a while, you know, beat the crap out of their competitors and just take over the market. But how do you feel about that for, you know, your general startup today? It seems like there's sort of a new way being created, which is a much more efficient model. I think Jocko Vanderhooy calls it go-to-market efficiency, and he's been describing it as, you know, which is really a leaner team, if I were to just summarize it. But what are your thoughts on that? You know, I know you were obviously a part of what I would consider a growth at all cost company at Gong. I'll let you take it from there.
I think the answer of should we do growth at all costs depends on your current market dynamics. Are you in a market where the end result will be a winner take most dynamic? Right? Because if you're in a category with a very at parity competitor and you're in a horse race and you are of the belief that 5 years from now, whoever has the most market share will continue to accumulate even more market share, then profitability, cash flow, if you can swear those things aside for a few years, you should go into land grab mode. You should go clinch market share because you will be able to throw off cash and profit later. And you won't be able to do that if you give up the throne, so to speak, to somebody else. Right. I don't think most startups are in that situation.
Most are not. It's rare. Yeah, it's rare.
I think many of them could be at the turn of a dime, right? But they're not, right? You might be in a situation where you're not, and then some big, well-funded, experienced competitor comes into your space. Now it might make sense to go raise, but this is probably 10% of tech startups. For the rest of them, I don't even think about profit. I think about cash, right? If you've ever heard of the book, The Outsiders, it is a book that analyzes the most successful CEOs in history as measured by market value they have created. As a side note, Jack Welch, not on that list. Everybody thinks he was like the best. And I'm not taking anything away from Jack Welch. He's an amazing CEO. But these are typically understated executives, typically, just not in the media flashy. Warren Buffett's one of them. He's a good example. And the number one commonality every single one of them had was optimizing for cash flow. And cash flow is different than, of course, it's different from revenue, although sometimes I question whether people understand that. And it's different from profit too. You can be turning a profit and consuming cash rather than throwing off cash. So like one of the things we've done at Pclub is we have two revenue streams. We have a B2B revenue stream where we sell the equivalent of a SaaS product and services with it that has like the learning platform and this kind of thing. And it's like very typical SaaS model. Right. And then we have the consumer business where individual AEs and founders and those kind of people can go swipe their credit cards and get a Pclub subscription.
So it's like team sales and individual sales, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We started doing individual sales. And am I going to build a $100 million ARR company off of individual sales? Probably not. But it's been incredible for cash flow. We've raised a very tiny amount of money. It was about 2 years ago. We've burned none of it because we have cash coming in the door from our B2C business. We redeploy that into higher prospect areas of the business, such as B2B. And that's how we've done it. And I think a lot of founders, even though it's not exactly strategic, should spend more time thinking about how can I throw off more cash? Can I reduce bloated cost? And more importantly, are there other opportunities to generate cash, even though it might not be strategic cash? There's nothing strategic about losing cash unless you're gunning for market share over a 4 to 5 year period because you're in a winner take most market.
Right. Yeah, I would say what came to mind when you said that is product quality has probably a lot to do with it, right? And maybe some of the big failures over the last decade have been people who really didn't have the greatest product going too heavy in this, let me get market share. And that's going to all come back to bite you in the butt, a couple of years later when the churn starts to come in. And now you've got all these people, you've got this big engine, all this overhead cost and all this momentum in growing the team. But now you have all this, sort of downward pressure of your product's not great and customers are complaining. And you just end up with like 10x the problems that you could have had if you just maybe moved slower and actually built the product at a pace that makes sense. So do you think that's right? Do you think product quality has a bit to do with that today?
If this isn't true for every problem, but if you have model problems and you grow very fast, you have successfully grown your problems very fast.
Yeah.
Better
well
to
said.
take a year, do some modest growth, put the foundations in place, and then scale like bonkers in future years. Now that it's like a skyscraper. You dig deep into the ground first, build a foundation, and then scale that thing up later.
Yeah, I was just having that conversation yesterday. I have it all the time about sales operations. Founders say, well, we'll do that later. We'll invest in that later. It's like, it will cost you 10 times as much later. It will be 10 times as hard later. You're going to have to train 10 times the amount of employees on how to make all the changes later. Like, it really makes very little sense to wait on that stuff, but they just want the revenue today. Revenue. That's it. Don't worry about anything else. We'll figure it all out. We'll figure it out later. But hey, it's so painful when you can see those days coming ahead. What are your thoughts on sales AI? This is a big one. I've had this debate with a handful of people. I had the CEO of AI SDR on, and I'm doing an event with him soon. He's going to do like an AMA. He wants to just let people challenge him and ask him questions, which I think is really cool. He's been super open and honest about sort of the upsides and the downsides. Do you have an opinion yet on like, is the SDR going to be replaced? Is it going to turn into something else? Or is it just sort of like, this is a new tool, a new arrow in our quiver, so to speak?
This is a topical area that I prefer to be a student of life on rather than a teacher. I'm hesitant to make many predictions because I think most people who make predictions, God bless them, are wrong. I'm not criticizing them. I think
you just have to make enough so that one of them's right.
I will make one prediction, though. I think probably in the next 5 years, we're going to see a massive skill chasm in B2B sales. And the reason I say that is I think a lot of the most entry-level sales jobs are probably going to be done away with by AI. And so that kind of eliminates an incubation period for people getting into sales. They're getting into these entry-level jobs that are not high skilled, but they can get their feet wet for 18 to 24 months before they take a higher skilled job. So I think there's going to be this chasm of like entry-level worker or sales professional doesn't really have many options for entry-level sales jobs. And what do we do about that? Are we just going to be taking those people and popping them into a mid-market AE role? That sounds like a bad option. That's right. I don't know about you, but 22-year-old Chris probably would not have handled that very well.
And how much I actually think the demand for entry-level reps will go down, right? Because the market is now flooded with everyone who left college and got into tech sales. Right. And so there's so much talent in the market that wasn't there 10 years ago because this industry was sort of still taking shape. And so, yeah, I actually think the whole notion of just hiring people straight out of college is probably just going to be less of those opportunities, because why would you if there's a bunch of people that are looking for jobs that already have 5-10 years experience?
Yeah. And so that's my big prediction is like, I think there's probably going to be a big chasm of like entry level to like getting into an experienced sales role. I don't have any idea how that's going to be solved. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, though.
Yeah, I think it's gonna I don't know if you've seen what Howard at Rome is doing. So Howard Lerman, actually just had him on the podcast as well. So he's building Rome, which is obviously a remote focused product. But the way he's building his company is also quite different. He's sort of mimicking a lot of what Slack did in the early days, like not hiring a bunch of salespeople and not investing a bunch in like advertising or marketing or outbound. He's building, I forget exactly what he called it, but it's basically a referral engine where he wants each customer to lead to the next customer, to the next customer. And he'll have a few people on staff that can help people if they have questions. But for the most part, it's set up to just sign up and self-serve. And so I think, the question of like, will AI replace salespeople? I think it goes hand in hand with just the PLG, the self-serve. We already have, what was the exact stat was that buyers are getting 80% of the way through the buying journey on their own before reaching out to a salesperson. And that was back in 2019. And so that means that buyers are choosing to find information on their own. They're choosing to try to arrive at a decision on their own. And they're really only reaching out when they need to. And so the way I see the sales function serving customers going forward is it's really buyer enablement. It's how do we make it easier for them to get the information they need? How do we make it easier for them to ultimately make a decision and move forward? And as we keep doing that, we're basically ungating content, right? People are putting their demo videos online. They're having knowledge bases or whatever. Whereas they used to say, like, if you want to know our pricing, like you got to get on the call. And a lot of that's sort of fading away, right? And so I think that alone will prove what you're saying to be true. Is there just going to be less demand for salespeople because you're going to be able to just buy things without them, in the same way that we now go to Amazon instead of going to Nordstrom and walking in there and they come up and annoy you and ask what you're looking for and they want to help you. And now we just find it on Amazon, right? And so there's less retail salespeople, and I think we'll see the same ultimate effect there. All right, cool. I want to learn about Pclub. Tell me what's going on there. Maybe give a little bit of the story of where it started and what it's grown into. Did you set out, like, I sell an online course and I plan to make some more, but it's sort of like just a supplementary thing to my consulting business. And I wanted to have something that I could offer, to salespeople, since I generally there's not a lot of money to make. Coaching salespeople it would be too expensive for them unless you're doing big groups and all this sort of stuff. But so you're going in a bigger direction with it, right? You're creating a whole platform. You're aggregating different courses from different people. Was that the game plan from the start, or did you evolve into that?
Me and my co-founder wanted to start this business about 10 years ago because our company is inspired by another company called Pluralsight. So Pluralsight is technically a SaaS platform where they have a huge library of about 7,000 online courses in it for technology folks, right? Like developers, IT, security, that kind of stuff.
Got it.
And they peaked at about 500 million in annual revenue. So juggernaut business, very big business. And there are many other companies just like Pluralsight in other markets and niches, right? Skillsoft does the same thing for like leadership and managers. And then you have some mass market ones like Coursera and Udemy and that kind of stuff.
And they just cover every category, basically.
Yeah. And some of them are like, they're focused on higher ed. Some of it, like Udemy, is a total open marketplace, and you can learn how to cook and you can learn how to do cash flow analysis on Udemy. And so we saw this gap in the market where it's like, how is there not a juggernaut online learning company for revenue and go to market, which is where the real money is? Yeah. And we never really did anything with that. Fast forward to 2022, we decided to act on that. And that's what Pclub is intended to be, is large online library. We call it a skill transformation platform because it has other things like AI role plays and that kind of thing. Right. That can cover virtually every skill gap, every skill topic, every skill level, and every unique role in a tech revenue team, from SMB AE curriculum to mid-market to enterprise to account management, et cetera, et cetera. And we sell that both to businesses as an upskilling solution, where we also offer enablement services to help them operationalize it. And we sell it to individuals through a membership, and we have a lot of fun doing it.
Cool. How many different courses do you have on there today, roughly?
I think we're up to about 40 now, so somewhere in that neighborhood. And
all from a variety of different instructors, huh?
Yeah. This is a conversation you and I should have as far as who should be doing courses with us. If you're ever interested, this is a conversation we should have. But yeah.
Is it something where like you would take the course that I've already created and I put it sort of on your marketplace? Like, I don't know if you want to get into the business model, but I'm curious how that all works.
So it generally will create new courses from scratch if we feel like somebody already had like really good content. Like Kevin Dorsey, he contributed a couple of his courses. We did have him reshoot his because they needed to be cleaned up from like an editing perspective and some other stuff like that. But it kind of varies. Most courses we create from scratch, and they're all taught by proven revenue experts, right? People who have that kind of unique combination of experts at the skill that they teach, track record of the skill that they teach, and they also know how to teach it. Right. Usually most people can only do one of those things. There's like, stodgy trainer who's never closed a deal, and there's a super rep who's amazingly good at what they do, but they can't really teach. We look for the people who can do both of them.
And I find even doing online courses is different than teaching in the office or in a classroom, because you need to nail every word, right? It's like you're now a broadcaster. You're like you need to have it worded just right, because the engagement factor is there. Whereas if you're in the office, I don't care if you get disengaged, you're not leaving, right? Like you're in this meeting, you work
you call
here.
somebody by name and ask them a question. Whereas like an online, you can improvise to some extent with live instructional training, and online courses, you have to be very structured. You have to break tactics to be very prescriptive. Otherwise, people feel like they were taught what to do and not how to do it. And there's a lot to it.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. So who should join? Is it any salesperson? Is there a specific type of person? Is it entry level? Is it people who are struggling, people who want to get into leadership? Is there a sweet spot?
Yeah, right now, industry-wise, we're currently only focused on tech, right? B2B SaaS.
I was going to ask that too. Okay. So it is B2B SaaS.
So we don't go to like manufacturing, sales, medical devices, none of that kind of stuff. We have aspirations to. Today, it's just, business to business technology. And we have separate curriculum for each role within that kind of organization. So if you're an SDR, we have curriculum for you. SMB, high velocity AE, we have curriculum for you. Most of our curriculum is probably best geared toward like mid-market and lower enterprise sellers. And then we have revenue leadership tracks as well.
Oh, you do have leadership. That was going to be my last question there. Cool. Okay, good stuff. Where can people find you? Obviously, pclub.io. Follow you on LinkedIn. You're on Twitter as well. Anywhere else?
No, LinkedIn's probably your best bet. If you're interested in Pclub, you named the website. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I try my best to respond to everybody. I don't always fulfill on that promise.
Yeah, I'm guilty of it too. It's really hard.
Yeah.
A lot of sales pitches, mostly all sales pitches.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Chris. This was a blast. I appreciate it. And we'll have to catch up again soon sometime.
All right. Thanks, Collin.
Thank you.